has always been a very strong supporter of NATO. I mean, it goes back to his days in the Senate, of course, and actually our former president used to be his staffer for foreign affairs, so he's very well versed. He's a strong advocate for NATO. I can't say that he's never let us down, and I don't think he's going to let us down in NATO. So I think he did well. The summit had some really solid outcomes. Support for Ukraine, also getting our defense plan in order, defense spending. There's also a defense industrial pledge coming out, where every country now also is pledging to build up its own industry to support the alliance. So I think there's very solid support from Biden, and I think that's not going to change. And I think, as we talked about before, whether the other candidate, if the other candidate wins as well, I think you will see the same level of support. It'll be different. Every president will bring in different kinds of priorities. The same goes for the European leaders when they come in. So I think the common core, as I said before, is there. And again, NATO, the United States, to solve its own problems, it needs friends, and there's no better friends than those in NATO.
You don't think that is NATO concerned at all about Trump's rhetoric about pulling out of NATO or anything like that? I mean, it was brought up. It takes congressional approval, but is that a concern for NATO?
Like I said before, I mean, NATO. There's always been times in the alliance where there was concern about, quite frankly, anybody. Whether it was the left wing in the 70s in Europe, France under de Gaulle. There's always been concerns, but I think the common core is always there. In the final analysis, there's a case for NATO, whether the president is Trump or Biden, and that will stay. Congress has been super solid in its support behind us. We see it every time we meet with our congressional delegation. So I'm not worried.
What do you see as the biggest challenge facing NATO today?
Well, I mean, the Russian challenge, of course, is the most direct and immediate threat. I mean, they've invaded another European country, which is not a NATO member, but I think that's the line in the sand that we need to draw, is that you cannot just gobble up somebody's territory and get away with it, because then who's next? And allies, of course, concerned that some of our eastern allies would be next, and that we need to put a stop to. And quite frankly, also we need to show other countries out there that you can't do that, whether it's in South America, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in the China Strait. That's where it's got to end. And Putin right now is trying to outweigh us, and we need to show him that he cannot outweigh us. That NATO has just adopted a sort of a long, sustained plan for supporting Ukraine militarily, and that's there. So that's a strong sign from our side to tell him, look, you can't wait us out. We're going to be there. We're going to have their backs.
The rise of populism and nationalism across Europe got to be a big concern to NATO. Do they take a long-term view with these kinds of things, or they're, just kind of waiting it out? So, like you sort of mentioned before with Putin.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, so you have seen whether you want to call them fringe movements or smaller, whether it's on the left, on the right, up and down. You have those kind of movements, and we've seen it in the past. And it is a moment in time where political landscapes are shifting. We see that in the Parliamentary Assembly as well, where we see more new parties coming in. And sometimes it's just it's a matter of explaining what NATO is, what NATO does, and some will understand why it's important. Some will not, but it's still important to have them at the table. I mean, we are democracy, but democracy is messy. That's the problem. That's not a problem. That's actually the good quality of a democracy. It's we need to figure things out in a democratic society, and we same here.
Does NATO see what's going on in the United States right now, an attack on democracy?
No, I think there of course. I think democracy is under pressure in many countries, and I think again democracy is messy, and we see that here. We see it in France just a couple of weeks ago. The same thing, where parties that normally haven't held power before came very close to holding power, and that's democracy. It's messy, and we got to live with it, and we got to celebrate that, because the other side doesn't have democracy. They have one-party systems, or they have multiple parties, but in reality they have one guy that decides. And that's not what we want. So,
well, there's concern that if Trump is elected, will it be more of an authoritative type government. Is NATO concerned about that?
NATO doesn't have a position on domestic politics. I mean, we're an alliance of governments. We see in the NATO Parliamentary Assembly the parliamentary side, and we see very, very strong, solid support in Congress for that, and that's what we hear. And I think that's a solid message that we believe, because we know these folks for a long time. So we're not so concerned. It's about having the conversation, and I think the United States democracy is strong and resilient, just as France's democracy is strong and resilient. I think that's what makes us better in the long run, because we are resilient. Democracy is messy, but we always come out for the better at the end.
Thank you.
If former President Trump were to get reelected and the funding for NATO effectively be cut off or drastically cut, does NATO have a plan to step in and kind of help fund the missing U.S. parts that are going to Ukraine currently?
Look, I think it's about. President Trump has been right, as many other presidents before him, that the Europeans have to step up more, and they have to pay more for their own defense. We've sort of had a long sleep for 20 years. Maybe more than that, resting on our laurels, so to speak. So we need to get to a place where we Europeans as well are investing, and we have turned a corner. 2/3 of the allies are now investing 2%. Most of them have plans to reach the 2% within a couple of years. So I think we're in a good spot. There's more to be done. There will be some areas where we need to spend even more. In some countries, quite frankly, just to catch up with what's been lost. And I think once you see that, whether it's President Trump or President Biden, they will have the same story, that Europe needs to spend more, and that's what we are getting.
Excellent. Thank you.